But tell me, mama, what's going on? Tell me, darling, what's going on?
Welcome back, everybody. The Bacon and Egg Show, episode number 78, April the 13th, 2022. No. Yeah, it is the 13th. I was like, wait a second. I thought it was
all day.
Jay, what is going on, man? Been a little bit. It's been kind of a hectic time around these parts, but glad to be back at it. What's going on?
Yeah, not a lot, man. Just enjoying this beautiful day out here in Dove Springs District Park.
You can hear the birds chirping. Yeah,
birds chirping, and feel like we're watching the Masters on TV with the birds chirping. Even though when I found out that those bird sounds were piped in, even though I feel like I should have known that, I was kind of disappointed anyway. But yeah, get the real deal out here today out at the park, and looking forward to talking a little Longhorns, a little Austin FC. We got a lot going on since we last talked. So you good, man? Everything going all right?
Yeah, we got it. We got a lot to hit on.
Yeah,
it's kind of an interesting. Well, we'll start here. I know we usually kick off with the cup of coffee, but this is going to kind of intertwine with our show run. I'll just go ahead and move this up a little bit and ask: is Texas back this week?
Man, judging by the way that some of these press conferences are going, I'm going to go out on a limb and say Texas is not back this week. Kerry, this is the classic case for me, and we'll dive into this of a coach really trying to establish a culture at a program, and there being some guys that have been around for a while that can sort of tell that maybe they haven't quite turned the corner yet with some of this stuff. So for those of you that are unaware of what we're talking about, Moro Ojimo, defensive lineman for the Longhorns, senior guy, super smart dude, gonna be a doctor or a lawyer or something like that. Like he's a brilliant kid. And he sat and did 25 minutes with local media the other day, and basically was asked about the culture and things like that, and he didn't hold back. I mean, let's just go into a little bit of what he said. He was asked about whether young players listen to him, and Ojimo said, they're 18 to 22-year-olds that want to chase women, want to chase money, want to chase alcohol, and they don't see the future. They're very distracted by what's in front of them. It's such a hard thing, especially guys that haven't been in a winning culture. That's why it's very easy for a lot of these powerhouses to keep going, because it's established. It's much more difficult. They always talk about coming here and changing stuff. Coming here, changing stuff, it's like it's ingrained. He continued by saying, there are players that are, quote, more worried about being on 6th Street than like balling and making $50 million. It's crazy as hell. I don't know why. And then one other quote, when he asked about the offensive line, Ojimo said, Christian Jones has got to figure it out. Andrej Karic and Jalen Garth need to grow up. Kerry, everybody's tired of 7-6 and 5-7, and I think Ojimo said a lot of what anybody that's watched this program since about 2009, 2010, probably 2010 have.
I know they were winning then, but arguably you could even go back a little bit further than that.
So for you, Kerry, what did you make of Ojimo's comments? And we haven't even taken a dive into Sarkisian's response yet, but just on the surface, what was your reaction to Ojimo's comments and in terms of his honest answers about the culture at Texas football?
I personally don't have a problem with it. I think we were talking about this, on our text thread with Longhorn Insider Mike Holland about like what he's saying. Everybody's he's just saying what everybody's known and what's been apparent and what has shown itself over the last decade plus. Is there a different way to go about it? Sure. But there kind of honestly comes a point where stuff like this needs to be said publicly in order to kind of like get over this, right? I mean, you can only kind of like handle it with kid gloves for so long before, you just have to blow the whole thing wide open, and having a player, a senior, talk about it this way, I don't have a problem with it personally. Could he have gone about it a little bit differently? I do think calling other players out by name might have been going a little bit too, I think it was going a little bit too far with it. But I mean, I don't know. Sometimes, we'll see how these specific players respond to it. Sometimes, everybody responds differently. Who's to say that one of these guys, Kerry needs to grow up, that doesn't go, you know what, I got called out by a senior in the media about my behavior, and I need to turn it around. I don't want to be called out like that in public anymore. I don't know. On the whole, I don't have an issue with it. We get tired as fans and people that monitor the program and, journalists that follow this, of getting the same boxed, canned quotes from players every year, no matter what sport it is. Oh, it's great team effort, all those, like all the coach speak and player speak and all those kinds of things. And you had someone speaking candidly. And I think I think it should be appreciated. I think that it gives a glimpse into the inside of what is a multi-billion-dollar business and one of the premier programs in this multi-billion-dollar business. And I don't have an issue with it. I just don't have an issue with it. What about you?
I'm with you especially in regards to calling out individual players by names in that instance.
Yeah.
I mean, I know when you're asked about offensive linemen, and he goes against those guys in practice every day, so he probably sees the potential that a Christian Jones has, and Andrej Karic has, a Jalen Garth has, like those players that he called up by name. He sees what they can be when they're giving everything that they have, but then you flip it and he also sees maybe that those guys could be handling their business in a different way. And maybe that's frustrating for him. It's one thing if this is what I'll say. It's one thing if this is Casey Hampton calling out players, a guy that's proven it, season after season, week after week, everything that he did for the program in terms of performing at a high level. Casey Hampton's one of those guys that was looked at as like, okay, he's going to come around and tell you, you're screwing up, fix it. And you go, all right, Casey, you're right. I'll be better. Ojimo was a disappointment last year in terms of production and on field. This is a very smart guy. Everything he does is calculated. And that's what makes me think he knew exactly what the repercussions were going to be when he went into this, went on for about 25 minutes. I don't feel like he didn't know that this was going to ruffle feathers and probably piss off Sarkisian. Like he knew. He was very aware of that. He's a very smart guy.
But you don't do something like that if you don't care.
Yeah, but the thing for me is like Ojimo was a guy, and I remember during last year's season preview, I thought he was going to be the guy that would lead the team in sacks, that would, even from an interior lineman position, would have a breakout year. And that just didn't happen. So my biggest question mark is, okay, you have guys that care this much, right? That want to see Texas succeed, that are there to play for Texas, not at Texas, right? Like you hear that sort of talked about here locally. Some of the guys like Rod Babers, who's very passionate about this sort of thing and isn't your typical sunshine pumper local media guy. And I think that Ojimo's head is in the right place. I just don't know if necessarily he was the right guy to do it, except in a sense that he is that senior guy. He is one of the guys that's been here and been through these regime changes and has seen how low this program can go in terms of what the culture is. Now, if I'm his teammate and I'm like, dude, like you didn't exactly perform up to the highest standards last year either. Who are you to call me out? I can see this causing sort of that riff. But again, like you said, Kerry, it comes down to if you're the guy that he's talking about and you're the guy that he's talking about, you're the only one that this is going to bother. This isn't going to bother the guys that are taking care of their business. This isn't going to bother the guys, especially the newer guys, the Xavier Worthies, the guys that are more Sark guys. as opposed to holdovers from previous coaching regimes. And I'm glad that this happened. Like, you will never hear this happen at Alabama, ever. But in terms of where Texas is right now, I think Texas supporters need to have a clear understanding that Texas is not close to Alabama. They're not close
No.
to Georgia. They're not close to any of those Notre Dame. They're not close to any of those programs that year in and year out are winning double-digit games, are in contention for conference championships, are in contention for national championships. Texas is not there. Texas
Well,
is not back,
and you
in that sense.
mentioned the Casey Hampton stuff. Like if it was for him, you're talking about a Casey Hampton that was in a program that had a stable and healthy culture. So that's how it works naturally. This isn't a stable and healthy culture at Texas. After Sam Ehlinger left, all that there was being discussed when Sark then comes in is this leadership void. Who's going to be the leader? Who's going to be all that? It wasn't Casey Thompson, who, although a lot of players gravitated towards him, his dad meddled in the program and with journalists and all those things. He seemed, to be ended up in being more of a negative influence on the program by the time his, tenure at Texas was done. Nobody was filling that void. And I think that just speaks volumes about where this program still is. Because sure, there's, you have some Xavier Worthies, you have some of these guys that are coming in that are, Quinn Ewers, we'll see how he is, that are coming in and like kind of taking the reins a little bit. I still think there's a leadership void. And I think that talent and production aside, Ojimo seems to have at least a sense of leadership and a sense of responsibility inside of him to say and do something in regards to the direction that this program's going. He's a senior. This is going to be his last year on campus. And he's got to be thinking, like you said, this was a calculated move. And he's got to be thinking, what can I do to try to steer this thing the right way? And it might piss people off, but what's something that's going to try to break out of this pattern that's been going on for so long? Sometimes it takes something, but I don't know. We'll see. I do want to get into Sark and his response to this, because I'm not a huge fan of how he handled it, or how what Sark has said. Do you happen to have his quote there?
Yeah. So on Tuesday, Sarkisian has his presser and he says, quote, "Culture is always challenging. Culture is organic. And I think Morrow would be the first one to tell you, I think he'd love to have some of the things he said back." Now, stopping real quick, maybe
calling players out by
name.
Right.
But other than that, I don't
yeah.
necessarily think, So then Sarkisian said it was a little disheartening if one player's comments made it seem as if Texas has a locker room full of disinterested players. Quote, "But it was said and it was written, and so that's okay. But what we do internally, what we do in-house is more important to me." Okay, so then he goes on to be asked about the message itself, about Ojimo, set aside Ojimo calling out individual players. What about the message? Sarkisian goes on to say, quote, "The forum was really poor. He should not have done that in public. A player-led team, a really good player-led team, those issues, and if you have issues with anything, they get taken care of in the locker room, get taken care of in the meeting room. If you're really a family, you don't go out and talk about family business. You take care of things internally. I think his intentions were right, but the delivery and the form that was used was poor. In the end, you have to make sure to mow your own lawn first. And you've got to make sure your own house is in order first before you start to discuss what somebody else is doing or how they're doing it." And then asked if he would discipline Ojimo, Sarkisian said, "He won't be talking to you guys for a while." So Kerry, you've already sort of mentioned that you didn't really care for the way that Sarkisian handled this with his response. Was there something in particular that stood out to you about what he said?
Yeah.
Yeah,
a couple things, I think, to kind of go from back to front a little bit. Banning him from media duties. And then at the beginning saying culture is organic. Well, are you trying to, personally manage how the culture is built, or is it organic? Which one is it? Are you trying to control the message and control the narrative and all the, crack down on what players say and do? and just keep it behind closed doors, or is it organic? Which one is it? And another thing that caught me was, in really good player-led teams, he basically just told everybody that this is not a player-led team. That, again, there's a leadership void. It's not a player-led team. This is a coaching staff that's trying to establish a culture the way they want it. It's not developing organically, and that players haven't stepped up into leadership roles yet. And when one does try to step up into a leadership role, he gets, reprimanded for it.
I think, when we discussed who the next head coach was going to be after Tom Harlan was let go, it was very vital to me, and I think to you as well, that there was somebody that came in that had head coaching experience at a Power 5 level, that had done it, that had been there before. Like, that was something that was really key. Somebody that wasn't going to be learning on the job. This can go one of two ways. Either Sark really stuck his foot in his mouth here and, like you said, is really alerting everybody, whether it's on purpose or inadvertently, that there is still such a huge leadership void in this locker room right now, that the senior that you let out, and John Bianco is sitting right there when Ojomo's giving this press conference. He can pull the plug on that at any time. All this is that ran for 25 minutes, which is longer than Sarkisian's last press conference with the media. So don't tell me that you want to have this under control when you have the ability to control it and you let that go. It's one of the things that makes me believe, Kerry, that honestly, I think if Steve Sarkisian is the guy here at Texas, then I'm hoping that this is the 3D sort of chess that he's playing, where he wanted this to get out. He wanted there to be a player come out and say, hey, we suck right now in this locker room. What are we going to do? Is that probable? I don't know, man. But in my head, I would hope that this is a guy that said, hey, man, you're the smartest guy on this team. One of the smartest guys on this team. You're a senior leader. What are you going to do? How are we going to fix this? What do we need to do this? If this was calculated in every sense of the imagination, then that's great. I just don't think, going back to coaches having that experience and not learning on the fly, unfortunately, I don't think that this is the case. I think this is Steve Sarkisian still understanding how to run a program, how to lead a program, how to control a locker room, and how to keep the message what he wants it to be. And that, to me, is still a head coach that is learning, which is what we wanted to avoid in terms of who would be hired here at the University of Texas. That there's such a small amount of coaches that would be available to be hired that fit that bill perfectly. But in the state that this program is in right now, it needs somebody that can come in and day one establish their culture, establish what the expectations are going to be in the locker room and for this team, establish leaders in the locker room. He hasn't done it yet. I know we're only about to start year 2, Kerry. I know this is year 2. I don't want to totally just jump ship on Sark yet. But the returns up to this point, outside of outstanding recruiting, obviously, outside of that, the returns on Steve Sarkisian in a year and a half are not there for me.
Well, I think what's really interesting here is you can't force culture. Well, hold on. Before I get to that, you talk about the returns. Can this team win with a, not a great culture? Sure. Texas recruits well enough. Sark has recruited well enough that this team can still win some games, not have a great culture. You just won't be able to sustain it. This team can go and win 10 games this year with locker room issues. There's talent there, but that doesn't sustain. We've seen that already at Texas over the past decade. You win a Sugar Bowl and then it drifts away, right? Because of culture issues. But you can't force culture, whether that's in the office, in life in general. And it has, he was right in saying that it develops organically. I mean, it is organic. It's just like, people that, if you work for a company and they do stupid forced team building events or something, people hate that shit. That doesn't build culture. What builds culture, it's natural. You get along with the people that you work with or you spend your time with, all those things. Sometimes there's bumps in the road. Sometimes people don't fit in the culture. And if you want a truly player-led culture, they have to go through those growing pains. And this is part of it. You don't just turn the switch off and say, okay, you can't do that when you're trying to allow the player culture to develop itself. Ojimo might have been the one saying the words, but how many guys in that locker room share the exact same sentiment? And like you said, it might have just been the ones that he named by name that actually have a problem with this.
Right.
And if that's the case, you're talking about 95% of the rest of the roster not having an issue with it. Is that worth cutting off what was organically developing culture-wise if you're Sarkisian? I don't know if it is. I mean, I don't know. We're not in the room. But
right.
like you said, like there's kind of some, there's some red flags here about like this was a total, like the quotes had faded away. This was a total non-discussion, non-thing until he brought it up. And now it's a newsworthy story and it's being made a thing. And I don't know. It's we'll see where it goes. I mean, it's just something, it's just one of those things, like, is it that big in the grand scheme of things? Like in an isolated incident, is it that big? But like we talked about on our group text, in a series of incidents, you got Gia the monkey and all these, like, it starts to accumulate. And
remember when things start to stack up, like with Tom Herman, when it was, it's the head butting the players, it's the double birds to the Longhorn Network cameras. It's the things that you realize that someone lacks the maturity or lacks what it takes to be a leader at this level. And Sarkisian is starting to build up those sort of strikes against him, in my mind, in terms of him being that guy and him having the ability to be that person. Like we're starting to see it. And that's not saying that a coach can't recover from that.
Right, of course.
But for me, this is not what Steve Sarkisian needs to be concerned about going into his second spring, coming off a 5-7 season where you lost to Kansas at home.
Yep.
You have bigger issues than that. And I know, like, there's going to be like 18 or 19 freshmen coming in the summertime. A bunch of those are these offensive linemen in this historic recruiting class. Like, is there a possibility for a culture change once summer hits? Like, I mean, I would bet the answer to that is yes, because these are Sark's guys, right? Like, Ojimo's not Sark's guy.
No.
Is there a way that this culture can already start to shift? And I think that Sarkisian is looking forward to those 18 or 19, however many it is, that are going to be here during the summer and start working out with the team. Like that to me is where, do we start to hear things leaking out about, okay, like there's buy-in. And again, like you hear the typical hyperbole coming out of spring practice every year, and this year is no exception. But like, as we build towards the season, are we going to hear that this locker room culture is improving, that these guys are actually bought in? Or is there going to be more rumblings about, certain players not totally giving everything they have, and again, wanting to play at Texas instead of for Texas, or worrying about their NIL deals, or wanting to, get with chicks and party on 6th Street? Like, because I think this is the tip of the iceberg in terms of these and it might not be just straight out sitting at a presser with local media saying it, but these are the types of things that are going to just be leaked out.
Well,
our buddy Chip Brown will have a story or two throughout the season goes on, if this sort of thing continues to be a problem, and it'll get leaked out. And then where are you as a coach? You couldn't address it in the spring. It's leaking into the fall. Where are you then?
Well, I think what's fascinating here, you talk about the new group coming in. we've talked about for years and years and years. And, when you analyze this program's history and you wonder, you go back and look at the last however many decades, why has Texas underachieved minus, a span there with Mac where Texas was a premier program in the country. Otherwise, this program's underachieved for a long, long time, given the resource, all those things. Well, why isn't Texas, why haven't they done more? And I think part of that is, I think Ojomo's kind of saying the quiet part out loud there. It's Austin. We've talked about under multiple head coaches, under multiple athletic directors. What is it about players or whatever when they come to Texas? Things just don't, these aren't guys that weren't recruited. These are guys recruited by every major program in the country.
Right.
But why doesn't this pan out for damn dog?
Get him.
But see, Zeke agrees. But like, why don't they? But like, I think it's an issue with there's just a culture here, to keep using this word. And does it matter if these freshmen are Sark's guys if they're coming to Austin for NIL and nightlife and the scene? It doesn't matter if they were Tom Herman's or Mac Brown's or Fred Akers players. If that's what they're coming to Texas for, the results are probably going to end up being the same. And I don't know, sometimes if a player decides, hey, what's the difference between going to school in Tuscaloosa versus going to school in Austin? Maybe that says something. And not to, this is generalizing, of course, but like if, I think that's an important part of what Ojomo said about,
I agree.
They're coming here for, to live a life, it's a vibe, it's a scene.
Yeah.
And not to come work their ass off and get to the league.
Well, and before we move on from this, I just wanted to say that we've said that about players in terms of getting here, but we've also said the same thing about coaches.
100%.
The culture at Texas goes beyond, or being sort of toxic, goes beyond a football locker room. It goes beyond these locker rooms. It goes to Belmont. It goes to the entitled boosters. It goes to, it's really, it's widespread on this campus. And when Shaka Smart comes in and completely changes how he coaches once he gets to Texas. Why? What is the reason that Shaka Smart wasn't the Shaka Smart we thought we were getting once he got to Texas? Chris Beard comes in, and Chris Beard is himself. But again, it's like, is anything really changed from what we saw with the Shaka Smart led team? I know they got a tournament victory this year. Whether it was Charlie Strong or Tom Herman.
I think Charlie is just a bad head coach. I think we've seen enough sample size from that now to say that he just wasn't.
I don't disagree.
But still, the point stands. The point stands.
But was he set up for success in Austin?
Oh, no, absolutely not.
And the answer is no. Was Herman set up for success? I don't think the answer to that is yes either. I don't think he was set up to succeed here either. And now you've got a guy with a few skins on the wall in terms of, being an offensive mind, being a great recruiter and things like that, who hasn't really done it as a head coach. Is he going to be able to control this locker room? Is he going to be able to change the culture? Or the word that Moro Ojomo used was ingrained. Is this just who Texas is now? And that to me that's the burning question moving forward.
I think that's, like we've talked about, what's the mystery? Why is it? Like we mentioned, there's this span where Mac put it together for a series of years. But other than that, this has been the story of Texas football, and arguably it's, the other sports, with the exception of baseball, that
right.
Swimming and diving and golf and all the, all the other sports that win. But the big ticket sports like football and basketball, what has been this issue of there's just something, the mystery behind why things just don't, it's hard. I don't know. It's hard to put a finger on, but I think he's definitely getting at something about it being ingrained. It's just, it's what it is when you come to Texas. And
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No. That was,
There aren't as many hands in the pot for tennis or for women's soccer or for swimming and diving. There's way too many hands in the pot, way too many cooks in the kitchen for football and basketball. Way too many. And whether that means it's boosters, whether that means it's administrators, whatever it is, all of these other programs on campus are successful. Top 25 programs year in and year out, which is what Chris Del Conte said that he expected out of football when he got here, right? Like that football and everything at Texas, including football, will be top 25 and expected to compete, to be top 10 and to win national championships. There's a lot of programs on this campus that are doing that and have continued to do that from before Chris Del Conte was here. Football and basketball ain't there. And this is going to be his biggest test as athletic director is, can he get, I mean, the money's good and Chris Del Conte does a lot of things well. But his legacy will still be whether or not he could get football specifically over the hump, basketball on a lesser degree. But if he can't get football over the hump, then I feel like Chris Del Conte is going to be looked at as a failure in his time as the athletic director here at Texas, because that's the big ticket, like you mentioned. So, I mean, is it a culture thing in the locker room? You're damn right it is. But is it also a culture thing on that campus, in that athletic department, in the administration, just in general, with the boosters, and especially now with the NIL deals in play? I'm happy for kids to get money. This is muddying up those waters, and it makes it even harder to be a head coach and to be an athletic director in these instances. So, I mean, honestly, man, like Sark is paddling upstream right now, and he's going to have to really fight his way up current here to overcome all of the obstacles that are in front of him, because it's just been stacked for so long in a negative way. And that to me is why people, we all know this. Even if you casually observe the football program, you can tell that the culture is shit. But you hire a head coach to come in and say the right things and try to get you over the hump. Will Steve Sarkisian be able to do it? He's not checking those boxes for me so far. So,
yeah, and I know you mentioned he's swimming upstream here because of kind of some structural things that perhaps are ingrained that he's fighting against. But before we move on, I mean, like, some of these are self-induced errors as well, and that's where you have to minimize those at Texas. Mac was pretty good about minimizing his own self-induced, unforced errors. We'll see.
But
yeah,
that
the
was
jury's
from
out.
day
It's
one.
1 year in. Well, right.
That was from day one with Mac, and he had guys. He had instant credibility when he got to this campus, and people bought in. And I know they didn't win 10 games right away, but it wasn't long before they were churning that out every single year. And you get Ricky to stay, and it's like, oh shit, we should probably listen to this cat, and then it goes from there. Who's going to be Steve Sarkisian's Ricky Williams? That is going to be the guy that people can point at and follow and say, okay, this is the guy that is succeeding. This is the guy that Steve Sarkisian, that Coach Sark has talked into being that guy. Is it going to be Xavier Worthy? Is it going to be Quinn Ewers? Who's that guy? And it's like we were talking about last year, and Mike has said before, like, let's just get to the games, right? We can't wait to get to the games. And Quinn Ewers, is probably going to be the starting quarterback for this team. And winning cures a lot of these problems. And if he ends up being that dude for this program, we can see this culture change pretty quickly if he's that guy and this team wins. But if he's not, and Hudson Card doesn't turn out to be that guy either, the quarterback is the most important position in all of sports, probably, I would argue, and especially at the college football level. So, well, maybe not as much at college as it is pros, but you sure can go a longer way. You sure can go a longer way towards changing a program with a great quarterback than you can without one. I think that's in terms of being a coach that hasn't really done that before at a head coaching level. Alabama wins with or has shown that they can win without super great quarterbacks at a college level. But that's just
Yeah,
that's a
it's Bama.
factory over there. That's not as common. So, anyways, man, gotta hope that this can turn around as a supporter of Texas football. But
Oh yeah, and
again, like I said, the returns for Sark in a year and a half just aren't there for me.
yeah, and you mentioned let's get to the games. That's when it manifests itself, right? Winning cures all, but you won't get those wins. Like you can tell the problems within a culture on the field, and that's that we're going to find out. We'll see it. So it's just interesting to see it kind of manifesting itself in spring ball already. But yeah, it's going to be a long summer, isn't it? But but that's what we do here. That's what we discuss, whether Texas is back. And as you said earlier, I don't think they're back this week. So
I agree. Yep.
Well, a team that is back and seems to be back on to winning ways is the Texas baseball team. Let's touch on them real quick. A couple back-to-back series wins now after losing 2 of 3 in Lubbock and then losing a game to A&M at home midweek. Texas was able to start off the month with a series win against OU, beat UT RGV, and then a series win against TCU, and then a midweek win against Stephen F. Austin last night. They got Kansas State coming up, ranked number 7 in the country. Starting to win those series a little bit, I think was important. I think it was after losing the opening series against Tech, the last thing you want to do is then lose a series against Oklahoma and get really behind the 8 ball standings wise in the Big 12. So I think being able to kind of rebound here and now starting to stack up some wins. How are you feeling about this baseball team at the moment?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. Like the bats are obviously there. Melendez, the Hispanic Titanic, is leading the country in home runs right now. You got guys like Trey Faltini who are doing their thing up and down the lineup. The hitting is going to be there. For me, it's going to be a matter of pitching. And Tristan Stevens on Saturdays, he's going to be the biggest, not question mark, but if he can find a way to be consistent on that Saturday game, because Fridays are locked down. I mean, let's be honest. Like the performances on Friday nights are every weekend and week out. I say that, knock on wood. But the Saturday for Tristan Stevens to be able to be a little bit more consistent and find ways to get some more outs, that's going to be key for me in terms of, because then if you lose on Saturday, then you got to win on Sunday, and that pressure's to win the series, I should say. And that pressure's there. You don't want to have to go into Sunday, oh, we got to win this game to win the series. It's baseball. You're going to lose some. It happens. I mean, it's a long season. But for me, Kerry, it's the biggest hurdle to overcome is Stevens finding that consistency, because the bats are there. I think they put up 18 last night or something ridiculous like that. Like they're finding ways to get guys on base and get them across the plate. So can the pitching be sustained? And when you lose a guy early on in the season that you're really expecting to help, sort of finish up that weekend strong. When we talked going in, we thought Texas starters 1 through 3 were as good as anybody in the country. And then all of a sudden, okay, you lose a starter, you lose your Sunday guy, and then your Saturday guy is a little bit shaky and hasn't really found that consistency yet. And then there's question marks around this team, but as long as those bats are there, and I think they will be, especially, I don't know why teams are still pitching to Melendez. Like it's
absurd.
But I'm not complaining, obviously, because he's making it happen. So, yeah, man, what are you feeling? And Kansas State, I don't think they've won a conference game yet. This is a series to get right.
They're under 500, and yeah, I was kind of looking at their situation here. I mean, well, they took one from Oklahoma State, and which isn't a bad win there. Oklahoma State's good. That's about it. They've won one conference game. Okay. So yeah, this is an opportunity for Texas to, at minimum, win two out of 3 in Manhattan, right? I mean, that shouldn't be too much to ask, but yeah, I think they're in a good spot. Let's, Pierce is going to kind of navigate you mentioned like the pitching staff shock to the system that came, and we'll see what they can do. It's the schedule's a little bit, let's say backloaded, like Oklahoma State comes towards the end of the month. That'll be a great series here in Austin, but yeah, I think they're in good shape. It's it's a long season. Stay the course, finish in that top 8, get you, one of those nice seeds for a super regional, and take it from there. So,
Yeah,
but man,
just handle business, man. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Let's while we got a few minutes here, let's hit on Austin FC real quick. We had another win. Let's discuss that here in La Zona Verde. So, yeah, Austin FC picked up a home win versus Minnesota this past weekend, and yeah, what'd you make of that?
I think we made the same of that first half, which was absolute trash soccer by both sides. I mean, there's a reason why when the team releases a highlight video, they show the opening kickoff, and then the next highlight that they show is the second half kickoff.
So
That
great.
first half,
2 seconds into that video clip,
yeah.
it just boom, straight to the second half.
Yeah, it was sloppy. It was, I would say, even careless at times by Austin FC. Really, just it looked like a team that needed to find themselves. And the lineup for the most part, there weren't many changes. It's not like those guys haven't played together, and it just seemed like they were a little bit off, and that continued a little bit into the second half, but definitely look more under control. I think at the end of the first half, like both teams had combined total for 2 shots. And then I think there was like 18 in the second half. I mean, it was like one of those things where it's a tale of 2 halves, really, honestly. And when you're at home and you can keep your opponent off the scoreboard while playing that poorly, especially in an environment like Q2 Stadium, you got to just keep your head down and hope that you can get one across. And Urruti ended up scoring a nice one and put an Austin FC up front 1-0, which ended up being the final score. But yeah, I mean, it was Austin FC, high possession. Even in the first half, high possession, low outcome, which is what we saw a lot of last season with no results. This season, we're seeing that high possession, and we're starting to see some of those results on the scoring end of the pitch. Kerry, what was your takeaway from this one? Good to get 3 points at home, always defending your home turf. You can't give away those. And Minnesota isn't. This wasn't.
Minnesota's
Cincinnati
a good team.
or Miami, like
Minnesota's a good team.
This is a solid club. Yeah.
Yeah, Minnesota's good. And this was their first road loss of the season. Like, they've been a team that's gone on the road and gotten results. And they're a scrappy, physical, tough team to play against. And you can tell what their strategy was. Basically go out there. It wasn't full on park the bus, but it was close to it. Keep Driussi and the wingers at bay, kind of isolate Urruti a little bit. And it worked for the first half, but Austin kept with the strategy, and you started to see them finding those ways to start breaking down the Minnesota deep. They wore them down. And they're in that second half. I mean, the chances were there for Austin to have 3, maybe even 4 goals in that game. The Urruti chip that was cleared off the line. You had Ring just completely missed the net twice on 2 chances, but like the chances started to come. They stuck with the plan. It started to fall into place. I think Wolf's substitutions were much better this game than they were against San Jose, where he basically 2-0 up at San Jose just threw on Redis and basically just gave the game back to San Jose. Still got out of there with a point, but it should have been 3. And that mentality changed with this game. They were perfect substitutions, honestly, because Valencia was able to come on and then really fortify that midfield, bringing Gallagher and his speed on to counter what Minnesota was going to try to do on the counter attack to get back in the game was huge.
Right.
It was very encouraging. And again, this was against a good club. So sitting on 11 points, 4th in the Western Conference, 2 points off the top of the conference. And you get those 3 points at San Jose, Austin's sitting top right now on goal differential. So, but that's not what happened. So still in a really good spot. It's a really tight Western Conference. Austin's sitting 5th overall in the league in the, supporter shield standings. And there's some opportunities to stack some points up here over the next week. So go to DC this weekend, who they're sitting 10th in the East and sitting on 6 points. Austin hasn't been great historically on the road at all. But this seems like a winnable game, and if they can go out East, get 3 points or even just a point, then you come home to have Vancouver, who is pretty dismal, 13th in the West. They only have 4 points on the season so far. That's a chance to get another 3 and continue trying to stack and stay in the mix before the schedule really starts getting tough.
Yeah, got to get at least 4 points out of these next 2 to stay on pace. Would be great to go and get a road win and really start to solidify. Again, we talk about a culture to establish, to really solidify a winning culture here, to start to go on the road and pull off some of those victories is going to be key for Austin FC to really turn that around. I wanted to real quick mention on the substitutions, Danny Hosen got some run, and I feel like, he obviously got hurt last season, and he was one of those guys that was expected to be someone that was a threat up front for Josh Wolf. It was good to see him back on and getting some run, because there's going to be
his first competitive appearance at Q2.
There will be some injuries this year. And we're not even talking about Dominguez is off the field. We haven't even mentioned Dominguez is off the field. Cecilia Dominguez is off the field issues right now, who is currently suspended by the league, who cannot participate in team activities. There's a little bit of uncertainty about what's going on there, but he's not around the team right now. And, will he play for Austin FC this month, this season, ever again? It's up in the air right now. So there's going to be a need for some attacking players. And I was really pleased to see Hosen get some run. Owen Wolf,
he was really good when he came on late.
Last name, that is the head coach's son. That is the manager's son. But again, when you bring in guys like Wolf, Gallagher, that have that speed, that, Gallagher isn't afraid to take chances because he knows that he can get back and recover. And that's so key, especially coming off the bench. Being able to have those fresh legs and be confident that even if I go after something and make a mistake, because he's somebody that I love to see push forward from that left back position and really wreak havoc on the right side of a defense. And when he knows that he has the ability to take chances, and even if he misses, he can get back and recover, he did that a couple of different times. Obviously that's my guy. I'd love to see him with some more run, but if that's his role on this team, I think it's perfect for him in terms of being able to come on and provide that speed and those wheels late in the game when teams are either trying to overcome a deficit or trying to, extend a lead or even, take a lead. But when you have those wheels and Geller is not afraid of anything. Like he'll stick it. He got a yellow card. He's not afraid. Like he'll get nasty if he has to. And he has the speed. He has the 1-2. He'll get his nose in it. Nick Lima coming off the bench was also, that's been documented for me, is that I was up in the air on Lima for a lot of last year, and then he really came around for me towards the end of the season. And he's somebody that coming off the bench, man, with his presence, I was just.
And Jimenez had a great game too. And
he really did.
Yeah, to kind of replenish that defense there in the second half by both Gallagher and Lima coming on was, really savvy move.
Yeah, kudos to Wolf. Maybe he's starting to figure this out a little bit after you said, he probably did make a mistake in that San Jose match and may or may not have cost them a couple of points there with his substitutions. This was the exact opposite of that. I think we saw really smart moves, using all your substitutions properly. So kudos to Wolf for that, man. I thought it was a really well played game from the second half on. and a really well managed game as well. So that's what you got to see out of a club that's trying to get over the hump and be taken seriously. You can't just have games that are played well. You can't just have games that are managed well by your coach. It's got to all come together. And hopefully this is the start of that for Austin FC.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Ben, I think we'll call it there. And good stuff. Great conversation today. Yeah, man, this has been good. Let's do it again soon.
Appreciate you guys listening.
Thanks, y'all. We'll see you.
ATX represent Fatal, baby.
All in 06 on a Saturday. Can the